We've already discussed peristalsis. That is the series of wave-like muscular contractions due to the involuntary movement of smooth muscles that are embedded within the GI tract wall. Why do we care? Because you need to move food from your mouth all the way down to your anus, and you need to prepare it and process it in order to garner nutrients and produce energy. You will have a layer of circular muscles around the GI tract, and you will also have a layer of longitudinal muscles that follow the length of the GI tract. In the stomach, you are going to have particularly intense peristaltic movement, in part because it has that third layer of diagonal muscle fibers. And in fact, those muscle movement or those muscle contractions can be so intense that you can actually sense and feel your stomach churning, or so they say, which is food moving through your GI tract once it hits the stomach. Segmentation is different from peristalsis. It is going to be the action of sort of chunking up parts of the bolus or the chyme as it moves along your GI tract due to those circular muscles. And if you think about kneading bread, the movement is quite similar to that. But why do we care? Because it's going to help expose more of the chyme or the surface area of the chyme to digestive enzymes and to digestive secretions. So you can see peristalsis indicated in the upper diagram. You can see the direction of movement, hopefully, is one way. And those chunks are indicating the segmentation portion of muscular movement. So this is a TC3 swimming pool. What does it have to do with digestive secretions? If you remember the bit about saliva, we produce, make even more digestive secretions than we do saliva during our lifetime. We produce about 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools full of digestive secretions. Body is just so delightful. So we need to take those larger food particles and chemically digest them into smaller molecules that we can actually absorb and therefore use. And there will be multiple different organs along the alimentary canal which produce secretions. We've already talked about salivary glands. We know that the stomach has to produce at least HCl because it's really acidic. The pancreas is going to produce bicarbonate ions, which will neutralize the acidity of the chyme leaving the stomach. Pancreas is also the major driver in terms of production and secretion of digestive enzymes. The liver produces bile stored in the gallbladder and then released from the gallbladder when you eat a fatty meal. And the small intestine will also produce and secrete various, not only enzymes, but hormones. So enzymes, why do we care about enzymes? They are going to allow us to break apart bonds in the macromolecules. And again, we're doing this because we want to break those macromolecules down into a form that is small enough to be absorbed in the jejunum and the ileum. So the enzymes are going to be super important because they kind of act like knives. They are going to break those macromolecules down into their building blocks. We'll talk more about the macromolecules and those building blocks in the next 3 modules. And why do we care about that? Because when you break chemical bonds, you release energy. So when you talk about chemical digestion, that is going to occur in part because of the action of these digestive enzymes. And when you break chemical bonds, you release energy. There are several classes or categories of enzymes. Anytime you see a name that has ASE tacked on the end of it, you're talking about an enzyme. You can probably figure out what each of these do. So there you have it. Protease, for example, is going to break down proteins. A peptidase, what a surprise, will break down polypeptide chains, etc. Salivary gland is going to produce saliva. No surprise there. Saliva will have mucus in it. No surprise there. The main enzyme that is associated with saliva is salivary amylase. You will also find lingual lipase in your saliva. Amylase is going to begin carbohydrate digestion. Lipase, you got it, will start the breakdown of lipids. Remember that not a lot of digestion occurs in the mouth simply because the food doesn't stay there long enough to have anything happen. Consume it, you chew it up, and then you swallow it. It's not there very long. The stomach has these structures which are known as pits. You'll hear about gastric pits when you take anatomy and go over the digestive system. Within the pits, you'll find these various types of cells, some of which are going to produce and secrete hydrochloric acid. Remember that the acidity of the stomach is going to be super important for denaturing proteins in the walls of the pathogens that you consume when you consume food. That very low pH can actually damage the stomach lining. So it's going to be super important that you protect your stomach walls by secreting an extra thick layer of that mucus that will basically coat every digestive organ. We also have goblet cells. If you ever take anatomy and physiology, you'll get to learn all about various types of tissues. If you've already taken it, you'll remember epithelial cells and specialized epithelial cells, which are known as goblet cells. And these are going to secrete some of the mucus that you find throughout the GI tract. So this shows you a lovely picture of the histology of the stomach lining. And up here, if you look really closely, you can see all these white blobs. Those white blobs are actually goblet cells. Once again, what do? Produce and secrete mucus. And that mucus will help protect the walls as material is moving along the length of the alimentary canal. Also remember that it's going to help protect the stomach lining from hydrochloric acid. The liver produces bile. The liver is an amazing organ. It has well over 400 functions. And we learn, if you're in class taking A&P, or even in this class, we learn maybe a handful of them. Liver synthesizes bile. That bile is shipped off to the gallbladder. And when you eat a particularly fatty meal, the gallbladder will be triggered to release bile. It is an emulsifier. And really, that is just a fancy way of saying it helps to break down fat. Love the liver, I do. Again, the only true digestive function of the liver is the production of bile. It does also do a number of other things, which includes metabolizing the macromolecules. It's also going to produce and store glycogen. It is going to filter toxins out of your blood, etc., etc. It's also going to produce a number of proteins which aid with your osmotic pressure in your blood vessels, etc., etc. I love the liver. Pancreas, also super important. It is going to produce and release enzymes that you require for the breakdown of those macromolecules. It will also produce and release bicarbonate ions. And why do we care about bicarbonate ions? Remember that the acidity of the stomach is pretty amazing. And that acid material, when it leaves the stomach, would burn the lining of the small intestine. So those bicarbonate ions just neutralize that acidity. pancreas, again, is going to secrete those into the duodenum. The gallbladder will dump bile into the duodenum right at about the same point. Now, here's a question. What happens to people who have their gallbladders removed? Because there are a number of people who live happily and successfully without gallbladders. Basically, what happens is they just attach the duct from the liver directly to the duodenum, and you will have a very slow and consistent and steady dripping of bile directly into the duodenum. And most people do not see any difference, or most people do not have to make any adjustments in the way that they eat. Pancreas is not only an organ of the GI tract, it is also a structure that is associated with the endocrine system. When you talk about the digestive functions, and I would know this if I were you, when you talk about the digestive functions, you are talking about the pancreas as if it is an exocrine organ, which means it's going to excrete things into open areas. And sure enough, that lumen of the GI tract is an open area, going to secrete those bicarbonate ions, again, for neutralizing the chyme that is leaving the stomach, and digestive enzymes. When you talk about the endocrine function of the pancreas, it's going to secrete insulin and glucagon. I would bet every single student who is taking this class knows what insulin is, and that it is associated with helping control blood sugar levels. Everything about when you hear insulin or you hear the glucagon, both of which are hormones, you're talking about the endocrine function of the pancreas, not the exocrine or GI-related function of the pancreas. So we do have a number of protective factors that aid with the health and well-being of the GI tract. Both small and large intestine are going to maintain a neutral pH, which allows for the growth of bacteria, which is known as our intestinal or normal flora. That bacteria is going to be super important because it actually helps protect the GI tract from infectious invaders. We already have talked about how the bacteria in the large intestine can also produce some vitamin K as well as some of the B vitamins. They will also produce fatty acids that the body uses. And we've already talked about how that mucus will protect the lining of the digestive wall. The saliva actually has these components in it that help kill bacteria also. And if you have saliva in your mouth for about 20 minutes after a meal, that means that those agents are able to help remove pathogens. And I encourage you to take anatomy and physiology, because you will learn much, much more about the immune system and the GI tract and how they work together. I would know this forever. Just like most chemical digestion occurs in the jejunum, the majority of absorption of those nutrients will occur in the small intestine. We know that the small intestine is about 20 feet in length, and it's really loosely coiled back and forth. It has a ginormous surface area, and that super, super, super large surface area is going to be important because it allows you to have more surface area to absorb more nutrients in a very short period of time, relatively speaking. So here's a lovely tennis court. Yes, the surface of the small intestine, if you lay everything flat, it is approximately the size of a tennis court. And I really love these visual images, which help drive home the fact that the surface area of the small intestine is just enormous. So how does it get to be that way? Well, first of all, we know that the organ is about 20 feet long. It's just going to be curling back and forth and back and forth and back and forth in your abdominal cavity. And it will also, if you do a transverse section of the small intestine, you're going to see these contours or folds. There will be these folds, muscular folds, and on top of those muscular folds, you will have villi. And if you put one of those under an electron microscope, you will see these teeny little hair-like structures, which are known as microvilli. These are so small, you need an electron microscope to see them. You can see villi on a normal microscope. You need an electron microscope to see these microvilli. So those microvilli are going to be components or structures of cells that are going to secrete intestinal juices into the small intestine. And they also, the villi kind of move back and forth in order to catch nutrients. And then those nutrients are going to be transported into the cell and then into the blood and the lymph. If nutrient particle is too big to be moved into the circulatory system, in other words, like fat, it will be moved into the lymphatic system, where it'll travel through the lymphatic system until it gets to the heart. It'll be added to blood, and then it'll get shipped off to the digestive tract for processing. The liver is part of that functionality. So this shows you the small intestine. You can see the small intestine here, and you can see that it's cut here. And this shows you these folds. On top of those folds, you will have these guys, which are the villi. So here are the folds, muscular folds. Here are the villi. These are the villi blown up. And on top of those villi are the microvilli. And they do an incredible job of increasing surface area in order to be able to increase absorption within the small intestine. So the intestinal cells and those little microvilli are going to synthesize a ton of different enzymes. And there will be these specialized pathways which are going to process and then transport the different classes of macromolecules and their components. The major way that we move nutrients into and out of intestinal cells is through various forms of diffusion. When you talk about simple diffusion, it is basically just the random movement of molecules from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration until you have equilibrium. You have a couple of other types of diffusion, which are various forms of facilitated diffusion, where you use these membrane carriers to move various types of nutrients into the cell. And you also have some active transport mechanisms to move things like glucose or amino acids. As soon as you hear active transport, you know that those mechanisms require energy. When you hear passive transport, they do not require energy to have this happen. Active transport does. Think active stands for, it starts with an A, as does ATP. Active transport requires energy to have it happen, and simple diffusion, which is a passive transport mechanism, or facilitated diffusion, does not require energy. And this is just showing you an example of facilitated diffusion. No, I would not put something like this on a test and tell you, you have to tell me what's going on here. Myth. You can't eat many nutrient combinations in the same meal because your GI system cannot process them. I've also heard this: you can't eat cooked and raw food in the same meal. Not true. Totally not true. And actually, there's a fair amount of research which indicates that eating various nutrients together in whatever form you have them will enhance the absorption of others. Once the nutrients get into the intestinal cells, they will be shipped into the circulatory system or moved into the circulatory system. And we want that because you need to get nutrients to every single cell in the body, and all cells in the body have some sort of connection to the circulatory system, which is pretty amazing, right? Every single cell in your body is connected to some sort of blood vessel. Love that. One way or another. And this just shows you the major blood vessels, and it shows you that here's the large intestine, here's the pink part, and the purple part, that's the large intestine. And that is just showing you the blood supply, which is quite expansive. Now, the lymphatic system, the main function of the lymphatic system is to pull excess fluid out of your tissues and return it to blood. So it gets morphed back into blood. It doesn't have a pump to move the fluid. It's not connected to the heart. It actually relies on skeletal muscle contraction in order to move it, and sort of the buildup of lymph behind the stuff that's already in the vessels to help move that. Large lipids and fat-soluble vitamins are moved into the lymphatic system for transport out of the digestive system. Those larger molecules cannot get through into the circulatory system, but they can get into the lymphatic system through a really cool mechanism of these overlapping cells, which act like flaps. When the pressure of fluid gets too high on one side, it'll push those flaps open that surround the lymphatic vessel, and the fluid will actually rush into the vessel. It's pretty cool. Now, homeostasis plays a role in keeping you alive. Homeostasis is, by definition, your body's ability to adapt to a series of both internal and external changes in order to maintain a fairly constant internal environment. The endocrine system releases chemical messengers known as hormones, and the nervous system, which is going to be controlled by neurons, work together to control both digestive and absorption functions in the GI tract. You actually have a specialized, specific part of the nervous system, which is known as the enteric nervous system, which can act alone without control from the central nervous system and keep the GI system functioning, even if the connections between the enteric nervous system and the central nervous system, i.e. the brain and the spinal cord, are cut. Totally cool. So hormones, we know those are those sort of chemical messengers, because we talked about them when we mentioned them briefly when we talked about the endocrine system. The ones that are functioning within the GI tract are known as enterogastrones, and they travel in the blood until they get to the appropriate GI, their target GI organ that they regulate. Gastrin is going to be important because it's going to increase production of hydrochloric acid, and secretin is the hormone that is going to be secreted by the small intestine and will affect the functioning of the liver and the pancreas and encourage them or enhance their production of both bile and pancreatic enzymes and bicarbonate ions. So how do we keep our GI tract healthy? Really, the best way is to eat a moderate, healthy diet and exercise. So we do have a ton of different types of bacteria, the normal flora or intestinal flora and flora, and they are there to help keep us healthy. And in fact, the normal flora of the large intestine basically acts like an apartment building with full occupancy, or a hotel with full occupancy, because the intestine is so jam-packed with bacteria that bad bacteria literally can't get in unless there's some sort of dysregulation or dysfunction. The bad bacteria can't get in and set up shop. because all of the resources, the space and the resources are being taken up by your normal flora. There are probiotics that can be beneficial to your health. They enter the GI tract with food. There are prebiotics that are going to be important in supplying nutrients to those intestinal bacteria. I cannot stress the importance of your intestinal bacteria. And I'm pretty sure I get to talk about them a little bit later on. For example, why are they so important? For example, how's this for neat? There has been fairly recent research done which proves that the health of your normal flora can affect your motivation to exercise. Wait, what? Google it. It's true. The hormones that are produced by the GI tract or control the GI tract and the pathways of the nervous system formed by neurons are incredibly dynamic. And in fact, what you eat can, for example, alter what the pancreas secretes. So if the pancreas secretes these incredible amounts of digestive enzymes, which it does, why isn't it sort of eating itself? Why isn't basically are these enzymes breaking down the tissue of the pancreas itself? Because they don't actually produce active enzymes. They produce these precursors, which are known as proenzymes. Once they hit the GI tract, they're activated. And you got to remember, we are composed of the exact same molecules and macromolecules that we consume. And the enzymes can actually damage the tissues quite intensely if you don't have any sort of mechanism to protect it against our own enzymes. So how do you have an optimally functioning GI tract? If you want to live a long time, you better have one. Eat a balanced diet in moderation. Eat a variety of foods and have an adequate supply of nutrients. We need to be able to eat a healthy, well-rounded diet in moderation in order to maintain, grow, repair, and replace our tissues.